Imagine sleeping in the open desert when it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit outside. No heater, no electricity, yet you're warm enough to dream. That's how Navajo families survived winters for hundreds of years. But how could a house made of dirt outsmart the desert cold? You step inside, and it smells faintly of juniper smoke and warm soil. Outside, the wind slices across the mesa at 25 miles per hour. Inside, it's calm, almost too calm. The Navajo winter hogan wasn't a crude hut. It was a precision-built survival capsule. Logs of pinon or juniper formed the frame, each set at an angle for strength. Then came the skin, up to 2 feet of packed earth, hauled by hand and stomped into place. That's not random. Earth has a thermal mass that stores heat from the day, slowly releasing it through the night. Archaeologists have measured hogan interiors, staying 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than outside without any fire burning. Why did they trust dirt more than wood walls? The high desert can plunge from 60 degrees Fahrenheit at sunset to 15 degrees Fahrenheit by dawn. A wooden cabin loses heat fast. A hogan traps it like a clay oven. Inside, the roof slopes low, making the space feel tight but easier to heat. A smoke hole doubles as a vent, angled so the worst wind can't force its way in. It's not comfort. They built these for survival. And here's something few know. Some hogans had layers of plant fibers under the dirt to help block drafts. That detail vanished from many modern reconstructions, but old stories still whisper about it. But a warm house is useless if you can't greet the sun the right way, and that's where the doorway's secret comes in. So why did every hogan door face the morning sun? Imagine waking up to see the first line of gold spilling across the horizon. In a Navajo winter, that's not just beautiful, it's strategic. Every hogan doorway faced east. Always. This wasn't superstition alone. It was an engineering choice wrapped in cultural meaning. That first shaft of sunlight could raise the interior temperature by 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit within the first hour after sunrise. In a place where the night air might have dropped to 12 degrees Fahrenheit, that difference could mean less firewood burned and more energy saved for the day's work. But the reason ran deeper. Navajo teachings tell that life begins in the east, with the dawn. To open your door in any other direction would be to turn your back on the start of the day, and symbolically on life itself. Elders often say, when you greet the sun will greet you. Practicality and belief work together. By facing east, the doorway also caught the prevailing winter winds less directly, reducing cold drafts inside. The low doorway meant you had to bow as you entered, a gesture of humility every single morning. And here's something rarely discussed. In some families, children were taught to step outside at first light, breathe deeply, and listen for signs in the wind. Those early breaths were a kind of weather report learned over generations. But even with sunlight streaming in, no one wanted to waste a single ember from the night before. And that brings us to the fire that never truly died. Then how did they keep a fire alive while they slept? The high desert's night air could drop to 10 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, and letting the fire go out completely wasn't an option. Yet cutting and hauling extra pinon or juniper logs took enormous energy, especially in snow. So the Navajo had a trick passed down for generations. They never truly let the fire die. Before sleeping, they scraped the remaining logs into a glowing bed of embers, then buried it under a thick layer of ash. This ash acted like a natural insulator, trapping heat and keeping oxygen low enough to slow the burn without killing it. By morning, sometimes 8 to 10 hours later, you could stir the ash, find the living coals, and feed them with kindling to bring the fire roaring back. This method was more than convenience. It was survival math. Without it, families would burn twice the wood to reheat the space from cold each morning. And wood wasn't always close. Some families walked miles to gather enough. Archaeologists studying preserved hogan sites have found central fire pits, with stone rings scorched black from years of repeated ember banking, showing this was an entrenched, time-tested habit. Elders sometimes describe the morning relighting as waking the fire spirit, a reminder that keeping it alive overnight wasn't just practical. It honored a living presence in the home. But even the best fire needed help keeping heat in, which is why their blankets became more than just bedding. They were precision-built shields against the cold. But what made their blankets warmer than most today? A freezing wind outside could slice through ordinary cloth like it wasn't there. But a traditional Navajo blanket? That was different. It was a fortress of woven wool. After sheep were introduced by the Spanish in the 1600s, Navajo weavers developed a style so tight and durable that traders in the 1800s called them chief's blankets. Each was made from thousands of yards of hand-spun yarn, often taking months to complete. A single blanket could weigh 5 to 8 pounds and was woven with such a dense, balanced weave that it trapped body heat while blocking drafts. These blankets were more than bedding. They were multi-purpose survival tools. In the day, they could be worn draped over the shoulders or wrapped around the body like a coat. At night, families layered them, sometimes 3 or 4 deep, to create a pocket of warmth that could hold at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, even if the air outside froze solid. The patterns weren't random decoration either. Many carried symbolic designs, diamonds, stripes, and step motifs that reflected harmony, balance, and protection. Some elders said these patterns wove prayers into the wool. Surprisingly, early blankets were made entirely of natural colors, white, brown, and black from the sheep themselves. Dyes came later, giving rise to the vibrant reds and blues seen in museums today. But even the best blanket works better with shared body heat, which is why winter nights often meant sleeping so close you could hear every heartbeat beside you. So why did everyone sleep shoulder to shoulder? Picture a round hogan on a January night. Outside, the wind whips across the plateau, dragging the temperature down toward 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, the fire's heat clings low to the floor, slowly fading as the embers settle. This is where human closeness becomes a survival tool. Families didn't sleep scattered. They formed a circle or a line, shoulders pressed together, sometimes feet toward the fire pit in the center. Body heat, an average of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit per person, accumulates under heavy wool blankets, creating a shared microclimate. In tests of similar living conditions, this can push the temperature under the covers up by 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than the air outside. For children, sleeping next to elders wasn't only about warmth, it was protection. Coyotes might prowl outside, winds could tear at the smoke flap, and an ember might pop from the fire. The closeness meant someone always woke first to any danger. Oral histories recall winter nights filled with the sound of breathing, the occasional cough, and whispered conversations in the dark. When we were close, we dreamed the same dream, one elder told an anthropologist in the 1970s. The arrangement also had a social rhythm. New parents often slept on one side to shield infants from drafts. Older siblings acted as a living barrier for the youngest, while elders claimed the warmest spots nearest the fire. But even with fire and body heat, the fuel inside your own body determined whether you'd stay warm until dawn, and that's where the evening meal came in. But how could dinner keep them warm until morning? By sundown, the day's heat was slipping away fast. The Navajo didn't just eat for fullness, they ate for endurance. The evening meal was a slow-burning fire inside the body. A common winter dinner might be mutton stew. Chunks of sheep meat simmered for hours with root vegetables, onions, and wild herbs. Mutton has about 9 grams of fat per 100 grams of meat, and in cold weather, fat is critical. It digests slowly, releasing energy over many hours. This steady burn kept the body producing heat deep into the night. Blue corn mush, another staple, carried its own secret. Made from roasted blue cornmeal, whisked into boiling water, and sometimes sweetened with juniper ash, it was rich in complex carbohydrates and calcium. The ash increased the corn's niacin content, a chemical boost against malnutrition that also supported stronger circulation in the cold. Protein, fat, and carbs work together here, like parts of a stove: fuel, flame, and control. Eating late in the day meant those calories converted into heat rather than stored as fat. Some families added wild game, rabbit, deer, or elk, especially after a successful winter hunt. Hunters often said fatty cuts like marrow bones made the best night food because you could still feel the warmth hours later. But staying warm wasn't only about food or fire, it was also about the mind. winter nights could be long, dark, and lonely without something to keep spirits alive. And that's where the stories began. Then why were winter nights filled with stories and songs? Once the fire was banked and bellies were full, the desert night settled in, a silence so deep it could make you feel small. This was when the Hogan came alive with voices. Winter was the storytelling season in Navajo tradition. Certain sacred tales, especially those about the hero twins and the creation of the world, could only be told during the cold months. Elders said telling them in summer might wake the snakes or invite bad luck. The cold, in a way, was permission to speak. These weren't short bedtime stories. A single chant or legend could last hours, even days, with intricate verses and precise wording passed down for centuries. One ceremonial cycle, the night chant, spans 9 nights and includes over 400 songs, each carrying specific meaning, healing, or instruction. Storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was education. Children learned moral codes, survival tactics, the names of stars, and the migration paths of animals. Every voice in the Hogan was part of a living library. And songs? They weren't always solemn. Laughter often filled the air, with playful verses or humorous animal tales. Laughter kept people awake and warm. Yes, literally warm, since it increases blood flow and raises core temperature slightly. These long nights knitted families together in memory and tradition. But outside that circle of light, the cold could still turn dangerous without warning, something the Navajo learned to sense without a single modern tool. But how could they predict a freeze without tools? In the high desert, a sudden freeze could kill livestock, ruin food stores, or trap travelers. Without thermometers or weather radios, Navajo families relied on a set of inherited, razor-sharp senses. They read the wind first. A sudden stillness after sunset often meant a cold front was close. If the breeze shifted to come from the north and felt thin against the skin, elders would warn, "Cover the animals. Tonight will be hard." Animals themselves were living barometers. Sheep huddling tightly together in the early evening, cold coming, horses turning their backs to the wind. Expect frost? Even the flight patterns of ravens mattered. If they flew low and slow before dusk, a storm was brewing. Smell played a part too. The scent of wet earth without rain meant frost would settle. Some could even taste cold on the air, describing it as sharp and metallic. Over generations, these observations became an oral weather code. Certain families were known for their accuracy, and their warnings carried weight. Missing a sign could cost lives. Historians note that these methods often match the predictions of modern meteorology and accuracy, particularly for short-term changes. That's survival-level knowledge honed over centuries. But even the best forecast couldn't stop the cold from seeping in. The real magic came from how the Hogan itself was designed to hold on to every bit of warmth it captured. Then how did the Hogan store heat like a battery? The secret wasn't just the fire, it was the way the Hogan was built to remember warmth. Step inside after a sunny winter afternoon, and you'd feel it. A gentle, lingering heat radiating from the walls themselves. Traditional winter Hogans used piñon or juniper logs for the frame, but the real insulation came from a thick shell of packed earth, sometimes 18 to 24 inches deep. Earth has a high thermal mass, meaning it absorbs heat during the day and slowly releases it through the night. Even if the fire went low, the walls kept giving off stored warmth like a clay oven cooling after baking bread. The structure's round shape was no accident. With no sharp corners for heat to collect and escape, warm air circulated more evenly. The low domed roof trapped heat near the floor where people slept, while the small east-facing doorway minimized drafts. Some families added layers of woven brush or grass beneath the dirt to block tiny air leaks. A technique rarely mentioned today, but remembered in elder accounts. Archaeological surveys of old Hogan sites have even found these plant layers preserved under collapsed walls. In bitter cold, families sometimes double-skinned the inside, lining walls with extra blankets or hides for temporary insulation, a method that could push indoor temps 25 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit above outside air. But keeping humans warm was only part of survival. Livestock, sheep, goats, horses, were just as vulnerable. and losing them meant losing food, clothing, and trade. But how did they keep animals from freezing? In a Navajo winter, animals weren't just property, they were survival partners. A sheep lost to cold wasn't simply one less creature in the corral. It meant fewer meals, less wool, and weaker trade come spring. To protect them, families built windbreaks from pinyon logs, willow brush, or even snow itself. These barriers, positioned to block prevailing north and west winds, could cut wind chill by as much as 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Sheep corrals were often placed on south-facing slopes, catching whatever sunlight the short day allowed. Horses and goats sometimes shared shelter space, low, earth-walled pens roofed with brush and hides, where body heat from the animals themselves added a few precious degrees. Oral histories describe how families would drape saddle blankets or woven rugs over the most valuable riding horses at night, securing them with rawhide ties. Water was another challenge. Ice forming in troughs had to be broken several times a day. In some cases, shallow wells were covered with wooden lids to prevent freezing entirely. Elders recall nights when animals were brought closer to the hogan, sometimes only a few steps away, so their sounds could be heard through the cold. If the sheep moved too much in the dark, one elder warned, the cold is chasing them. Keeping animals alive was an unbroken winter ritual, but there were nights when even that wasn't enough, and families had to fall back on their most extreme survival measures. So, what did they do in the harshest cold? Some winters in the Four Corners brought nights where the air bit harder than memory, temperatures plunging to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, winds screaming over mesas at 40 miles per hour. On such nights, the regular tricks weren't enough. Families reached for their last lines of defense. One method was banking the hogan, piling extra dirt, snow, or even slabs of frozen mud against the outer walls to seal gaps and add insulation. Snow, surprisingly, worked well because it trapped air, much like a modern down jacket. If conditions turned deadly, some families retreated to rock overhangs or shallow caves, especially those facing south. These natural shelters could stay 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than open ground, and when combined with a small controlled fire, could hold heat for hours. Food became a heat source too. High-fat snacks, dried mutton fat, roasted pine nuts, or pemmican were eaten right before sleeping to fuel the body's internal furnace. Children were swaddled tighter, sometimes with heated stones wrapped in cloth placed near their feet. Hunters returning late in such weather risked frostbite in minutes, so families kept extra dry clothing hanging above the fire just in case. Elders tell of winters when smoke from the fire would cling low inside the hogan because the cold air outside pressed down so hard. That was the sign, don't travel, stay together. And in those nights, the warmth that mattered most wasn't from the fire or blankets. It was from the people you survived beside. But why was winter the season for family and memory? When the winds howled outside and the desert lay silent under snow, the world shrank to the circle of firelight inside the hogan. This was more than shelter. It was the season when family bonds were reforged. Winter travel was limited. Hunting was shorter, herding slower. Families had hours together, uninterrupted by the demands of planting or trading. These months became the prime time for oral history. Elders would recount lineages going back 10, sometimes 15 generations, each name tied to a place or an event. The stories weren't entertainment, they were identity. Children learned the origins of weaving patterns, the meanings of ceremonial songs, the locations of sacred springs. They heard about hunts and blizzards, raids survived, and kindnesses repaid across decades. Every tale served a purpose, passing on survival knowledge disguised as legend. Winter was also the season for certain ceremonies, healing chants, blessing rituals, and initiations that required darkness and stillness. The Nightway and other 9-day ceremonies could fill the hogan with rhythmic drum beats, the air thick with cedar smoke. Even games carried meaning. String games played with loops of yarn were more than pastimes. They trained fingers for weaving and knotting, critical skills for daily life. By spring, the memories woven during these nights traveled with each person. As one elder said, the cold keeps us close and the stories keep us warm. And so, when the first thaw came, They carried both fire and family forward into the year ahead. For the Navajo, winter was never just survival. It was skill, tradition, and family. Tap the next video on screen, like, and subscribe to keep this history alive.